Hello YouTube, welcome back. As you know, I've been making a lot of videos lately about the future of Harley Davidson and my speculation on how things could turn out. Certainly Harley Davidson's been having some rough times, particularly over the last year, and the pandemic's only added to their woes. But one of the things I suggested for their future success is that they end up being bought by a much larger company. So it got me to thinking. Apparently, the Chinese are taking advantage of the current economic situation with a number of U.S. companies, and they are targeting them for purchase, for acquisition. Certainly, they're looking at high-tech, defense-related firms, which the U.S. Justice Department and others will probably block a lot of those sales, but they've been looking at those opportunities. I'm not suggesting that they view Harley Davidson as a high-tech opportunity, but certainly it could just be a general good business opportunity for them. You know, they've bought a lot of theater chains, Hollywood studios in the last few years. Looks like mostly so they could have editorial control over what gets put in movies relative to how China is perceived. But Harley's a bit vulnerable right now. Their stock price is down about 25% on the year. It's been going down quarter to quarter in terms of earnings and revenues. Their third quarter earnings report is going to come out here in a week or so. Be really curious to see how that's going to turn out. But what makes them a bit vulnerable to needing to sell to anyone with the cash is the fact that they've got about $11 billion in debt versus about $1.6 billion in assets. The credit rating company Moody's just downgraded Harley Davidson's credit worthiness just one level above junk bond status. So that means going forward, when they need to borrow more money, and they will, it's going to cost them a lot more money to service that debt. And in the climate of declining sales and profit, that's a vicious cycle. So I thought I would give that as a perspective. You know, the U.S. taxpayers bailed out GM and Chrysler after the 2008-2009 recession, and the taxpayers lost about $1 billion to each of those companies as part of that bailout. But one of those companies, Chrysler, was purchased by Fiat Group in 2014, and that Italian-based company is now in the process of being sold to a French multinational corporation. So, nowadays I'm not sure that most people who buy Dodge Ram pickups much care that the owner of the company that they're buying from is in Europe. Still the trucks are by and large made in the United States, and that's a good thing. But time marches on. As long as people are getting the trucks that they want, I don't think they seem to care too much who actually owns the company making the product. Right now, how many parts in a Harley Davidson are Chinese made? I mean, there are a number of parts of foreign origin in Harley Davidson these days. All the Harleys sold in the United States are assembled in the United States, which is a good thing. I hope that continues to be the case. But, you've got the clutch and the brake parts made in Italy. The pistons are made in Austria. The suspension's made in Japan. And the electronic components are made in Mexico and China. So I'm wondering if a Chinese company were to come along and buy Harley Davidson, which may ensure their survival, much as when Harley Davidson was purchased in the 70s by AMF. And that company had a lot of quality issues, but it did survive, or make the Harley Davidson allowed them to survive and go into the 80s, under which time they got more protection from the federal government by imposing tariffs on Japanese motorcycles. And then not long after that, the company went public, and Harley Davidson generated lots of money, lots of revenue and profit in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But it may be time for another company to come along and buy them out. So let's say if your Harley Davidson company was owned by an Italian consortium, let's say Volkswagen Group, would you care? I mean, would you care enough to not want to buy the motorcycle? I think another step, which would be a step too far for many people, is if those motorcycles, if they were foreign owned, were suddenly assembled overseas. I mean, what would be in it for a Chinese company to own Harley Davidson? I mean, it's an iconic brand. It would be easier for a Chinese-owned Harley Davidson to outsource parts to cheaper production areas across the world, to certainly assemble bikes, some of their bikes overseas, and maybe to get an entry into some other markets with the cachet of the Harley Davidson name. I mean, maybe it's just enough for somebody to buy the company and milk it for as many dollars as they can for as long as they can, and use it and lose it sort of a scenario. But, you know, if you're somebody like me that's pushing age 60, sometimes I think to myself, well, how many more bikes am I going to buy in the amount of time left I have to ride? I mean, I'm hoping to ride another 10 or 15 years. I've got a 2019 Street Glide Special. That's probably going to last me for the rest of my riding career, at least for my primary bike. But, you know, maybe they're going to come out with new features, a bigger engine, high performance, something to entice me to trade a 5-year-old motorcycle for a new motorcycle. But by that time, is there a good chance Harley's going to be owned by somebody else, that the bikes are going to be assembled somewhere else, that they're going to have a higher parts content from overseas manufacturers? You know, how would these things weigh on my decision making? How would they weigh on your decision making? I only ask that because to me that may indicate the path forward for a Harley Davidson if they are owned by a foreign company. I mean, what are the odds that if Harley Davidson's purchased, it's going to be owned by a U.S. based company? I mean, that's quite possible. But the name, just the name itself, the branding has a tremendous value. I mean, if you look at Indian motorcycles, they had a couple of incarnations after the company went out in the early 50s, but the current incarnation is, by all accounts, very successful, is owned by Polaris. So the name's worth a lot of money. Harley Davidson's be worth way more than the Indian name, in my opinion. So somebody's going to do something with it. That company, those motorcycles aren't going to go away altogether anytime soon. So the question is, who's going to own them, and how are they going to operate the company? Is that going to bring broader opportunities for a more diverse product line, entry into more markets? I mean, Harley Davidson just pulled the plug on trying to sell bikes in India. I mean, that's a huge market. It's as big as China, if not bigger. So these are all things that I ponder on occasion as I'm cruising around. But anyway, please let me know your thoughts and comments. I'd be interested in what you have to say about these topics. Thanks very much.